So we're giving everyone a little time to adjust and to the terraced effect up here. Representative Wargo, we understand you're, yep, thank you for keeping your distance, but you're with us, and that's what matters. Mayor McDonald of Bartlett will be with us tomorrow, and we may, when we get to this point on the agenda, take up the pilot report, and then we might just defer voting on it till he's here tomorrow so he can speak on it. But we have a quorum, and I will, well, I could really do some damage to this. Oh, no, I won't do that. We'll just call the meeting of the, believe it or not, the 144th Commission, Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations to order. I'll dispense with the calling of the roll if there's no objection to that. We have a quorum present. And welcome, everyone. Welcome to Cordell Hall, our first meeting here in this new facility. Everybody is adjusting a little bit to the layout, but it's good to finally have a permanent home. And it's also good to have a new member here joining us in Senator Ken Yeager, our chairman. This is not Chairman Yeager's first tour of duty at TACIR. He's back. He's excited to be here, and we're excited to have him. For those watching in from Kingston, he is also the chair of the Senate State and Local Government Committee, and is sometimes even referred to, not so much here locally, but as Professor Yeager, because he teaches at Roane State. So welcome. Thanks for coming back. There goes Brother Cardwell. He's learning about the chairs. If you see some of us drop out of sight, we're all, I told you we're, Charlie, you okay there? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Before you are the, behind tab 1, the minutes of the December 2017 meeting, and I'll entertain a motion to approve. Thank you, Mr. McMahon. It's been properly moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? All right, it's unanimous. The minutes are approved. Cliff, behind tab 2, I think this is your, the commission staff and update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you've already noted, Chairman Yeager is joining us as a new member of the commission, and that's covered in the commission update. And in addition to that, we have a staff update, and I don't think he's in the room with us today, but I'm sure he's watching on streaming. And that's Senior Research Associate Bob Morio recently completed the graduate certificate in Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, at Tennessee State University. Any of you who have read any of our recent reports have seen Bob's handiwork already. Bob is our master map maker, and we really, I think our reports benefit greatly from his ability to convey the detailed information in a geographic manner. I would also add that Senior Research Associate Dave Kaiser is enrolled in the same program, and Senior Research Associate Jennifer Berry has just started work in the Graduate Certificate Program in Public Policy, also at Tennessee State University. So assuming Bob's watching, if you would just join me in congratulating him on his accomplishment. And then, Mr. Chairman, we have one other additional update that's not listed in the docket book, and that's Policy Coordinator Matt Owen has a brief update on the status of broadband grants.
Hold on. Got it? All right. That was it. I'm going now. A brief update on, first on two of the programs that I discussed at our December meeting, the broadband coverage grants. Grant recipients should be announced next week. That's the week of January 29th for the coverage expansion grants. And for the broadband adoption working group, the working group has not met since our last commission meeting, but still anticipating the release of the resource guide for improving broadband adoption this spring. The two new issues to report. Just last week, digital literacy and broadband adoption grants were announced by the partnership between the Department of Economic and Community Development and the Secretary of State's office with Tennessee State Library and Archives. And these grants are for local libraries to improve access to broadband adoption and digital literacy training. So there were 52 grants awarded across 2 different grant categories, and this is to a total of 49 libraries across the state. And you can find a brief summary. I think the press release that Department of Economic and Community Development put out, which includes the list of libraries receiving grants, you can find that behind tab 2, I believe, in your docket books. So the 2 different grant categories, the first is called the Training Opportunities for the Public grants, are the top grants. And these grants support digital literacy training for a variety of skills related to internet use, and that's by providing funding for instructors. These grants also provide funding for devices and other equipment that might be needed at the library to provide these courses, and also to increase the capacity of libraries to serve as access points for the internet for the public. The second category of grants is specifically for programming in science, technology, engineering, and math education for students on subjects such as coding. That's primarily for K-12 students, but also available for adult learning, I believe, as well. As I mentioned, there were 44 top grants awarded, and there were 8 STEM grants awarded for this cycle. And both of these grants are consistent with the recommendations of the Commission's report that the state provides support through the coordinated efforts of its existing agencies to help communities improve broadband adoption, and also that increased funding be made available to libraries for improving access to digital literacy training and resources. And this follows from the Commission's finding that community anchor institutions in general, but libraries in particular, are particularly well situated to serve as community resources that can provide digital literacy training, as well as access to broadband service for individuals and families who lack it at home. And funding, yes. The total state funding for these grants for this cycle was a little less than $109,000. And there was a local match for part of the grants for the devices and the equipment that totaled around $15,000 for a total of $124,000 in funding for this cycle. The last thing that I'll mention is that as Department of Economic and Community Development also announced a broadband summit in partnership with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration that will be held in Nashville on March 20th of this year. This summit is titled Creating Partnerships to Ensure Access for All. And you all may remember NTIA was one of, provided some of the resources that we used in our report. It was actually very helpful for us, particularly in looking at strategies for improving broadband adoption. So that will be held in Nashville. Speakers and attendees include those from Tennessee as well as across the country, state and federal agencies, internet service providers, as well as community organizations. And it will highlight initiatives achieved through the newly enacted Broadband Accessibility Act. Topics will include the progress related to that act that has occurred in the last year, also advancing broadband partnerships, topics on providers leading the way, working together to strengthen infrastructure deployment, inclusion and equity in federal programs and funding opportunities. So that summit is actually available to everyone, so we can provide more information to the members if they're interested, but I've been told space is limited. So that concludes. If there are any questions, I'm happy to.
Any questions for the good doctor? I think most people know, but maybe not everyone looking in here, the Broadband Accessibility Act, once again, was based largely upon the work product of this commission, the study that was done over several years. And it is, I think it has put us in the forefront of a number of states that have tackled the issue. And I think that because of your work and the Broadband Accessibility Act, there's some likelihood that Tennessee will be even better positioned when President Trump makes some future announcements about some of his initiatives in infrastructure, including broadband. And I think Governor Haslam will probably actually move up his announcement about some of those grants from next week to as early as tomorrow. Okay. So stay tuned. But thank you again for all your good work. Appreciate it. We're still on your tab.
The only thing I would add, Mr. Chairman, is that, and actually Dave Kaiser during his presentation on infrastructure tomorrow is going to make some mention of how that relates to the upcoming announcements from the President. And that's all we have under tab 2, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Dr. Lippert, thank you very much. We'll move on to tab 3, Public Chapter 179. This is boat titling, our final report. It will require action. Nathan is at the podium ready to present where we've ended up on boat titling. Take it away, Mr. Shaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. My name is Nathan Shaver. I'm here to present the final report on boat titling. The report is found behind tab 3 in your docket books, and in response to the questions and comments and guidance, when the draft report was presented at the last Commission meeting in December, we've added some additional information to help clarify a few points made in the report, and have also revised one of the recommendations to reflect the lack of consensus between the government entities regarding who should administer a potential boat titling system. The changes from the draft report are highlighted in the final draft in front of you. So first I'll recap the recommendations, and then I'll discuss the changes in the report. The recommendations are found in the executive summary and listed in bold on pages 1 through 5. And 3 of the 4 recommendations from the draft report remain the same in the final report. In short, the report still recommends that, number 1, the state should implement a boat titling system. And this system should require titles for motorized and sail-powered boats that are either larger or likely to be more powerful. And the report provides several examples of how other states have limited titling requirements to larger or more powerful vessels. And number 2, any new boat titling system should be phased in and should not apply retroactively to all existing boats. This can be done by limiting titling either to boats manufactured at least 1 year after the law's effective date, or to boats sold or transferred at least 1 year after the law's effective date. We have examples of states that have done that. And number 3, the state should require boat dealers to meet minimum licensing requirements similar to those already required of motor vehicle and RV dealers. The background checks and surety bonds, for example, provide consumers with greater protection from frauds committed by unscrupulous boat dealers, and also help prevent those individuals from becoming boat dealers. So as mentioned earlier, the final report does include one revised recommendation regarding what government entity should administer boat titling. In response to the members' concerns that the county clerks, the TWRA, and the Department of Revenue have not reached consensus on this, the draft report's recommendation that boat titling be administered by the TWRA and the county clerks has been replaced in the final report with the following recommendation is proposed by several of the members at the last commission meeting. Now, and I quote, "In light of the lack of consensus regarding how a potential boat titling system should be administered in Tennessee, the TWRA, the county clerks, and the Department of Revenue should work together to determine an effective and agreed upon way to administer boat titling in the state. We request that they report back to the commission in December 2018. And I've reached out and I've spoken to the clerks and TWRA and the Department of Revenue, and everyone's on board with continuing to work together. And TACIR is going to help facilitate these meetings to hopefully reach some type of agreement about the best way to do it. So we've also included additional language in the report to clarify that boat titling would help prevent some but not all fraud. And there's also new information about the effect of boat titling, of a boat titling requirement on the recording taxes and filing fees that the Tennessee Secretary of State's office collects for UCC-1 financing statements. At the last commission meeting, we talked about how if a boat titling system were implemented, the filing fee and recording tax required to establish a UCC lien on a boat with the Secretary of State's office would no longer be collected for title boats, as the liens would be noted on the titles instead. And we verified that the recording tax calculations we previously presented are correct and added some additional language to explain how we made the calculations. At the last meeting, Representative Wargo and Representative Carter brought up some good points about how a change to titling would lead to a reduction in revenue to the Secretary of State's office, since there would be a reduction in the UCC boat liens along with the filing fees and recording taxes that are collected by the Secretary of State's office. For whatever reason, the prior fiscal notes did not address this issue. So I spoke with Nathan Burton he's a director of the Business Services Division over the UCC system with the Secretary of State's office, and also with Barbara Sampson, the Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Revenue, to see if we could get an estimate of the potential reduction in revenue. So the short answer, as Mr. Burton explained, is that there would be a reduction in the filing fee and the recording tax revenue, but it's not clear what that amount would be. According to the Secretary of State's office, the state's UCC lien filing system does not classify the collateral description in a way that their office could determine the number of boats with UCC liens, and therefore they don't have a mechanism in place to estimate any loss from the revenue from a reduction in those filing fees. We do know that the money collected from those UCC filing fees is earmarked to maintain the Secretary of State's UCC lien recording system, while the money collected from the recording tax is transmitted to the Department of Revenue. The overall recording tax revenue transmitted to the Department of Revenue was a little over $8 million in fiscal year 2017, with 13% going to the Housing Fund and 87% going to the General Fund. However, this amount that I just quoted includes the recording tax revenue from many other types of personal properties other than boats with UCC liens. So in other words, if a boat titling system were implemented, there could be a reduction in revenues as less filing fees and recording taxes would be collected from the reduced number of UCC liens for boats. And as the number of UCC boat liens in Tennessee is not known, it's not clear what that reduction would be. We went ahead and did some rough estimates that are not included in the report, just to give you an idea. And these are based on assumptions about what potential boat titling legislation would look like, and the number of new boats being purchased and financed each year in Tennessee from the information that provided to us by the National Marine Manufacturers Association. And we estimated there would roughly be about $230,000 reduction in the recording tax revenue and around an $80,000 reduction in the filing fees. And this estimate assumes that boat titling would apply to the new boats going forward, and that all new boats would be financed based on the average sale price of $43,000. So the report also includes new information on a state that administers boat titling without the assistance of local government officials, such as county clerks. Just to provide an example, in North Carolina, boat registration and titling are essentially administered by the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. And boaters are allowed to register and title their boats at one of more than 400 Wildlife Service agent locations, such as Walmart and sporting goods stores and gun shops, or by mailing that application into the Wildlife Resources Commission headquarters. So we just wanted to provide an example that if it was to be done centrally without the help of local government, there is an example from another state. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for Nathan? Thank you very much. We do need to take action on this as a final report. It is written in such a way that it's full of good information and guidance. It leaves open this issue to resolve between the departments. I doubt if it's going to result in any legislation of any kind this year as a result of that. But it's I think everybody understands better the need for further consideration of this, and if we could work out the administrative challenges, that it could be a good thing. Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to ask, was that report finale choreographed with the theme music that you were playing?
It was very well artfully done. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions? Anything else for our presenter? All right, I'll entertain a motion that we approve the report, properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? Very well. Duly approved. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
A lot of good work. Thank you.
Thanks.
And we'll move on. Here, behind tab 4, and Well, you're already there. Here I was fooling around so you'd have time to get up there. Public Chapter 431 on ad valorem payments in lieu of taxes, the pilot subject. This is our final report for approval. I'd mentioned previously that Mayor McDonald is unable to be here today, but he will be here tomorrow. If we could have the presentation and then defer voting until he's here tomorrow so that he can address his points, I think that would be appreciated by him, and we've got time. So having said that, Tyler, take it away.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Commission, my name is Tyler Carpenter, and I'm pleased to be back before you to present the final report for your approval, titled Encouraging Cooperation and Accountability in Payment in Lieu of Tax Agreements, which I will further refer to as pilots. The report can be found under tab 4. Today I will restate the directive given to the Commission by Public Chapter 431, Acts of 2017, make you aware of the changes made in response to questions and concerns raised at the last meeting, including the addition of language to one recommendation. And lastly, I will restate the 4 recommendations of the report. Public Chapter 431, Acts of 2017, directed the Commission to study the following: the economic benefits to counties and municipalities from the use of pilots and leases by industrial development corporations, also referred to as IDBs, to examine whether any economic benefits are derived from limiting the length of term of a pilot agreement or lease to 5 years, absent county approval, and lastly, to study any additional issues that the Commission deems relevant to meet the objective of the study. In response to concerns raised at the last meeting, on page 1, we clarify that in arriving at the 47% figure, the base total value of assessed property includes any value added by the business after the agreement has been made final. On page 2, I provide an additional explanation of the but-for argument, which says that but for the pilot agreement, the business would not have chosen to locate where they did. Also on page 2, we listed some of the factors that would be needed to determine the extent to which a pilot agreement may be economically beneficial. To better ensure that local governments achieve an economic benefit from the exchange, some IDBs require proof that benefits outweigh costs before they will approve a pilot. But unfortunately, local governments in the state do not generally collect enough information from businesses that have pilot agreements to determine this. On page 6, we provide a more thorough explanation of the interlocal agreements that are active in Shelby County and highlighted the one that exists between Shelby County and Bartlett, Tennessee. For the city property taxes, Bartlett only abates the improved value of the property, requiring the payment of pilots equal to taxes that were previously owed. This interlocal agreement can be found under Appendix E. The final change to the report can also be found on page 6 at the end of the first recommendation, where we suggest that in the event that local governments do not choose to cooperate with one another, the state may require that local governments must receive pilot payments at least equal to the portion of the revenue that would have otherwise gone to schools. Williamson County, Hamilton County, Chattanooga, and the city of Bartlett are a few local governments that currently require payment of the education portion of the property tax. Blount County only abates up to 65% of property taxes to reserve the remaining portion for education and other public works. Additionally, 9 states have some form of a requirement meant to protect education funding. This recommendation seeks to address concerns raised at the August meeting. The first 4 of the recommendations in the report addresses cooperation and collaboration among IDBs and local governments. In Tennessee, it is possible for IDBs established by some local governments to enter into pilot agreements that abate the property taxes of other local governments or special school districts without the consent of those tax jurisdictions. To ensure economic development needs are met, without undermining the tax base of other city, county, and special school districts, the state should encourage local governments to pursue one of the following cooperative approaches before entering into ad valorem pilot agreements with private businesses. The first of these approaches would be to form a joint IDB with representation of all separate taxing jurisdictions within the county. The second would be to enter into interlocal agreements with other taxing jurisdictions to establish criteria for any pilots that might affect shared tax bases. Or lastly, receive written approval from the city or county mayor, the city or county legislative body, and local special school districts before approval of pilot agreements. In absence of local governments taking one of these three cooperative approaches, for any pilot agreement longer than 10 years, either they or their IDBs should be required to make annual payments after the initial 10 years to the other affected local governments equal to the amount of property taxes those governments would otherwise receive for the affected property, based on its assessed value. Added to this recommendation is a sentence I just mentioned, which states that the state may consider requiring that local governments receive pilot payments at least equal to the portion of the revenue that would have otherwise gone to schools. Again, this would apply in the event that local governments did not choose one of the three cooperative approaches. The second recommendation addresses transparency. All IDB meetings are already open to the public, much like the hearings at which local governments approve other local incentive programs, such as tax increment financing or TIF. But unlike for TIF hearings, no public notice is currently required for IDB meetings. To improve transparency in the pilot approval process without undermining the confidentiality needed to negotiate agreements, IDBs should be required to provide at least some public notice prior to their meetings, similar to what is already required for TIF hearings. Notice requirements should allow IDBs flexibility regarding both the information provided and the time between posting and when a meeting is held to ensure they remain workable within business recruitment processes that are highly competitive. The third recommendation relates to both transparency and accountability. Lessees are required to submit annual reports that, among other things, include identification numbers for affected parcels, the dates and terms of their leases, and pilots made for each property. But these annual reports do not include information about capital investments made, jobs created, or wages offered. Because local governments authorize IDBs to negotiate pilot agreements to promote economic growth, it is important to know whether businesses are following through on promised benefits. Businesses should be required to include the total number of jobs created and taxes abated in the annual pilot report to the Comptroller of the Treasury. To allow for greater accountability and transparency, the Comptroller's Office has recently compiled a master list of all agreements, and in the future plans to send a copy of the annual reports they receive from each company to the local property assessor's office from that county so they can compare reports. The fourth and final recommendation addresses Tennessee's fiscal capacity model developed by the Commission. Pilot agreements can affect the distribution of state funding of K-12 education through their effect on property tax assessments, which are one of the factors used to calculate each county's fiscal capacity. Under the current model used by TACIR, local decisions regarding pilot agreements have the potential to shift some of the responsibility to pay the local share of the BEP from one county onto the other 94 counties, which violates a basic principle of fiscal capacity models that they not be affected by local decisions. TACIR's fiscal capacity calculation should be updated to include current IDB assessment amounts rather than the 1993 to 1995 pilot payment data already used. This would require a change in state law or a recommendation by the BEP Review Committee and approval by the General Assembly. This concludes my presentation of the final report. At this time, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? A lot of information here. And some questions have been raised or concern expressed about the three alternatives that you mentioned that are listed here, particularly the one on receiving written approval from the mayors, the legislative body, local special school districts, and the like. And I thought we might discuss that a little bit, and Mayor McDonald may want to talk about it a little bit as well tomorrow. But, you know, the concern is, are we recommending something that would unnecessarily tie the hands of those who have to make these decisions? There's too many hoops to jump through. Dr. Lippard told me that it's included there because there are jurisdictions that do that, and that it's fair to put it out there and let that be known. But having said that, I don't know if Representative Wargo wanted to speak to it, or any of you wanted to talk about this. We're sensitive to that, but it is already being done in several places. Can you remember which localities?
Well, Shelby County actually has that requirement in statute.
We do.
Yeah, and that's one of the three. This was actually modeled after that and expanded a little.
I'd rather have you say that than me.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
And then there are some that willingly collaborate on agreements where all of those parties are involved.
Mayor?
I'd like to know how many rural economic developers that you included when you were surveying this.
When we were speaking with people?
When you were doing, yes.
We spoke with, we did speak with several. I can't recall right off the top of my head. I have to get back with you on that.
That's
we spoke
fine.
with some in East Tennessee, I know that, and then spoke with some people with ECD about rural governments.
The ones in rural West Tennessee, a pilot is about the only incentive that we have to offer. And
Right.
if we get into the weeds about having to have county commissions and city councils and school boards all approve it, we're going to lose prospects because it's going to drag this process out too long.
Right.
And I think it's going to hurt economic development in the rural areas to some degree, just if we're required to get all the approvals and things that we would have to go through to make it go.
Dr. Lippard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely.
And you make a good point, Mayor, and that's one of the reasons we've included that as one of the three options, and quite honestly, the one we consider the most difficult of the three. But I believe the interlocal agreement option, or even the joint IDB option, the things that you do on the front end, so that you're not having to go behind the agreement and get agreement. Especially something an ILA approach an interlocal agreement approach makes more sense. But as there are jurisdictions that already do this approach, we wanted to include that as an option. Not a requirement, but one of the options.
Alan? Commissioner McMahon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to follow up and say, Mayor, I agree with you. Also in East Tennessee, it's especially in Northeast Tennessee, the communities are working on a deadline. They're working quick. And if a pilot is part of the deal, which in just about everything that they do, a pilot seems to come up as part of the deal, it's working under a deadline, and we're competing against other states and other regions of the country. And to have to go through a lot of hoops can often spoil a deal in a heartbeat, faster than anything else, and trying to get everything lined up. So often the target is moving at a rapid pace, and the more difficult it is to tread the waters there and get everybody to the table, you're going to lose deals. And that's just the reality of the way economic development works. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to offer my support to the mayor in West Tennessee, because it's the same in East Tennessee.
Tyler?
I just wanted to say we did consider that prospect, and that's one of the reasons why we chose to kind of emphasize doing agreements on the front end to help establish criteria. So when you do get to the point where you start reaching out to those businesses, everyone who has an interest in it has been able to represent themselves. And so with like an interlocal agreement, for example, the one that you will find in the report will show what is expected when an agreement is done, whether it's through Shelby County or through Bartlett, they have an understanding of what they're going to be offering. And I know that some of those things can change, but the idea is that to bring everyone to the table beforehand is the idea of the first two bullet points. And that third one, as Cliff said, is definitely the least desirable of the three, and more of an incentive to do the first two. So we did consider that idea. We prefer criteria on the front end, so this process does move quickly. Yeah.
I guess I hadn't ever stopped to consider whether public notice was required for IDB meetings. That seems like is there a reason? Does that something jump out at the mayor's as a yeah? Yeah, well, and we're going to talk some more about transparency tomorrow as well. Yes, sir, Mayor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. In Henry County's situation, the way we handle that, we do have a interlocal agreement that establishes our board, but our city of Paris has a IDB board, Industrial Development Board, that covers the entire county. They have the jurisdiction for the entire county. And we elected to have that as a public meeting in our community. So we do give notice of that meeting. However, most of the work is done prior to that. We present it to the board with the expectations that will be approved so we can finish the deal. And Aleph is correct, and Kenny both, that's about our best opportunity to incentivize someone coming into the rural communities. And in Northwest Tennessee, we've had an extremely difficult time recruiting industry. We're growing our own industry more than recruiting other industries in, but as they are expanding their plant and their equipment, they need the pilots. We take nothing off the books, that impact education, but on the new expansions, we do that. So anything that makes this process more difficult is going to really affect the rural counties. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor Greer. Representative
Wargo. Seeing how we're deferring to tomorrow, is it a possibility we could get them numbers of those that you have contacted on the reporting for us tomorrow? Is that a possibility if you had them, who you contacted?
Yeah, we've included most of them in the references, or in the person's contacted section.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a list, page 47 of the...
Gotcha. I'll look through that then. That is a key, I think, ingredient because there's different dynamics, as we know, of the affecting...
Go ahead.
And now that I think about it, so we spoke with several people who lead IDBs, who are CEOs of IDBs, but we also spoke with Younger Associates, who does the economic impact plan for most of the IDBs in the state. And so we did get some buy-in from a lot of different parties. To think of a specific one right now, I'm struggling with that, but you can look to the person's contacted section of the report to see who we spoke with.
Mr. Vice Chairman?
Yes, I think that the goal here is not to do away with the payment in lieu of taxes. The goal is to make it a participation by all parties involved in some manner, and I don't know exactly. I mean, I think there's some good recommendations in here about how to do that, but certainly I think everyone understands that pilots are an important tool in recruiting, in particular in the industry. But as I've stated before, when one entity can abate the taxes, the property taxes of another entity on a major development for 20 years, that has an impact on the taxpayers in either the city or the county, whoever does the abating, that it's going to have an impact on that tax base. And not having the other entity involved in any manner in that decision, I think, is a disservice to the citizens when you don't allow their representatives to be involved in that in some manner, because it does affect them, and you're allowing another governmental entity, whether it be a city or a county, to abate taxes for 20 years without any discussion whatsoever by that entity. I mean, you read it in the paper. And so I think that's the issue here, not whether pilots are important or not. I think we all agree that as a tool for industrial recruitment, pilots are important, and no one wants to see those eliminated. And I understand the process making it more difficult might delay it. But hopefully there's some middle ground that can be reached on having everybody involved in those decisions. The optimum thing is, like said earlier, the optimum thing is to have an agreement on the front end about how you're going to treat these things. And that's the optimum thing. But a lot of times it's hard to get to that point with governmental entities. And I don't know how we get there, but that's the issue, I think, for us in this report and for us moving forward, is how we get to that point without destroying the benefit that the pilots have for industrial recruitment.
Yeah, it's important to keep that in perspective, the context in which the report's offered. As we all know, on the local level, all too often perhaps, folks can be critical of what they perceive as giveaways and corporate welfare and the like, sometimes pejoratively referred to. I think reports like this provide more information so that people really get the right perspective about what is required to recruit or expand existing industries. And I know on the Council of State Governments, one of the chairmen several years ago from Kansas made it his business to study economic development competition between states, and they produced a booklet on it, and it's dog eat dog, and it can be a vicious circle, a downward spiral, because you can't take yourself out of the game, but it can be sort of a zero-sum game sometimes too. So I think work like this is very instructive to be able to provide people a better understanding of really what is involved. But were you surprised about the public notice provision on some of these not having notice? That's a pretty discrete issue that might be addressed. But other observations or comments? All right, well, we'll take it up again tomorrow, and tell us the difference between what we're doing today and the transparency piece tomorrow. I know that's not your presentation tomorrow, but they overlap.
Yeah, so one of the things we uncovered during our research was a new rule put out by GASB, GASB 77, and that will be discussed a little bit tomorrow. It has to do with transparency. It shows, say, a school district loses money to a pilot agreement, they are required to reflect that in their financial report, according to the rule, which we'll go over more of that tomorrow. And then we'll also have a speaker from Metro Nashville, their IDB, speak as well, and they've enhanced some of their transparency online. So should be an interesting presentation.
Well, it is, and that's to Mayor Waters' point. I mean, that's and I guess there's an issue whether that GASB provision will apply to Tennessee or not, but still, it does address your point. So we'll look forward to that tomorrow, too. Well, I can't believe it, but it looks like we're at the end of today's agenda. Can you believe that? You see, you're so efficient and effective and enjoy each other's company so much that we're going to recess until 8:30 a.m. tomorrow, unless there's anything Yeah, we can leave our materials here. Representative Love? Yep. We did do that. Well, we'll correct that. Representative Love has corrected us on the minutes from the December 2017 meeting. He actually was in attendance, and we'll make sure that those are corrected without objection, although Representative Parkinson may. Thank you. Duly noted. We'll take care of that without objection. Thank you all very much for your attention today, and we'll stand in recess till 8:30 tomorrow morning.